Hey, leaders, I'm here today to talk about the benefits of pausing, why it's so important as a leader in the corporate world to get out of overwhelm and to really get into whatever it is that you need to get done, but in a good, fulfilling way. Let's begin. I think one of the first things to do is really just to settle into our space. I think so many times we're just rushing, transitioning one meeting to the next, to the next, to the next, one thing. And we don't take time to super just check in and settle into wherever we are to actually arrive and be present. So let's just go ahead and do this right now together. As you listen, go ahead and close your eyes, just take a deep breath and uncross your legs or arms. If you're on the move now, just try to be as settled as you can and really feel the ground under you. Feel the earth, whether that's from your car or outside or from your floorboards. Imagine that earth is pushing up against your feet as you are pressing down, and that you are being held right here, exactly where you are, in present time, by Mother Earth and Father Sky, who is also holding you from above. And these two elements working in harmony so that you are present, feeling the air around you, feeling what's there behind you, in front of you, and at your sides. Just taking a deep breath, holding that breath if you can at the top, maybe placing a hand on your heart space and exhaling at your pace that feels good for you. Maybe letting out a sigh. Opening your eyes if they were closed. Coming back into your environment, just noticing the colors, the textures, wiggling your toes back on the feet, on your ground again. And nice job. That was all we needed to do. And noticing if you feel any different. Is there any energy shifts that feel different in your body, your nervous system? Does it feel any different? Maybe you're a little more relaxed. Maybe you're a little more present. It's all good. Just know whatever you've experienced is exactly what you needed today. Now, I want to talk about this whole world of pausing, and you probably have heard me talk a little bit about it if you know me at all, because it's one of my favorite words, and I wrote a book called Pause. However, I feel like we don't really know and remember why it's so important to intentionally shift our behavior. That's what I call a pause, by the way. It is not just a checkout and just do nothing, although it can be. It's not meditation. It's not a 2-month sabbatical. All of these are variations, but it's literally an intentional shift in behavior, which means intention is conscious. It means you are actively thinking from your your frontal lobe. You're free thinking, which means you're not being run by your subconscious programs that are operating 95% of the time, according to Dr. Bruce Lipton, who I just had 4 days with, and he's been fresh in my memory and mind. And I'm bringing him into this call today, this podcast. And I like to think about it like we're all icebergs. I used to explain this in one of my talks I used to do, and with several trainings that I've created for corporate clients. Think of yourself as an iceberg, right? Like visualize this big iceberg in the water. You've got what's above the waterline, and then you've got below the waterline, which you cannot see, right? And so there's 8 billion icebergs walking around on this planet right now, almost 8 billion, right? Crazy. The part that's exposed, the part above the surface is like our external world. This is the world that people see. This is how we present ourselves to others. And then we've got this internal world, or what's below the surface of the iceberg. So what do you think is on both of those sides, right? Let's just break them down, because this is going to tie back to pausing, believe it or not. Right? So when we're on the top of the iceberg, the surface level, these are things, like I said, they're visible to the outside world. It might be like your to-do list. What am I doing today? What am I wearing? My appearance, right? Physical appearance might be the emails that you get done, your exercise, you're doing well. Like, it's like the topical things that the world sees. Maybe it's you making dinner, you're carpooling the kids, whatever that might be. Then you've got the internal world, right? This below the waterline that you don't necessarily show to other people. They may know this if they know you, but it's not obvious. So think about what's under here. What would be this for you? Well, all of us have things like our own values that might be there. It's what drives us to do the things on the top. Maybe it's your traits, the things that make you, right? It could be your cultural background. It might be your own belief systems, right? Those are not visible to others, but you have a belief that the world is out to get you, for example, that you are not enough, right? These are like core limiting beliefs. This is where emotions come in, like their emotional intelligence is also here. So maybe you're brimming with fear, but on the outside, you're all smiles and no one would have a clue that you look a little distressed or you're stressed out, right? So we have both these parts of ourselves, the top of the iceberg and the bottom of the iceberg. And how do we bring them together, right? Like, what do we do? And I think the bottom of it is like 90% of the whole body of the iceberg. And that makes sense, right? We only see the tip of the iceberg. In fact, that's an expression we use. So when we shift things in the bottom of the iceberg, let's say our values are out of whack, or we add more stress, or we're feeling hyper emotions like strong fear mode or anxiety, what happens to the things on the top of the iceberg? They kind of get out of whack, right? They might be shuffled or shifted in ways that aren't necessarily something we want to control. But the difference here is when we're not aware of what's underneath the iceberg, if we're not self-aware of what's there, chances are the stuff on the top, no matter what you do to try to trim down your to-do list or write your emails or just do all those things that are surface level, then they don't really change anything below the iceberg. It's kind of like rearranging the chairs on the Titanic, as a friend of mine used to tell me. Right? It's still going to make big impacts because these things underneath the surface are what at play. And if we don't look at what's underneath the surface, if we aren't aware of what is there, then we tend to be out of alignment. And these two can work really well together if we know what's there and we feel good about what's there. But if we aren't willing to look, or if our emotions aren't in check and we don't know how we feel, then usually we aren't aware of how to better balance what's on the top of the iceberg, if that makes sense. So we need to bring both these parts together, the bottom and the top, to stay out of stress mode, to stay out of overwhelm. And this is where we can pause to just check in and see if we're in balance, to see if this is working for us, to see if I'm living my values or feeling authentic right now, or trusting where I'm at in the moment, or if my feelings are out of whack and I can't believe I'm even feeling this much anger because I didn't tell someone something that I should have probably said something, and so on and so forth, right? So the iceberg is important because we're all running around like these icebergs. We think the top is like what matters, and the reality is you got this whole underneath the surface part, which is really running around the majority of the time anyway. And I think this is analogous to like the conscious and the subconscious brain. I mentioned the subconscious brain is kind of the operating system. We have all these unconscious programs, and it's around 95% of the time, according to Bruce Lipton. It's running the show 95% of our day. 5% is the conscious brain, meaning we're thinking actively. We're not on autopilot. We're not doing things that are habitually done, and we do those things differently, right? So we need to address what's below the surface if we want anything to change in relation to our stress and how we show up with that above the surface work of like things like knowledge and skills and all of our talents and things like that. And how do we do that? And there, I think, is where the power of the pause comes in. And it has to do a lot with feelings, right? So I think that's super, super important. And just know that when we are able to bring those together, then we can really shift. But we aren't able to do that unless we pause and kind of take inventory or decide what we need most or to do differently. Okay. And when we do this, there's so many benefits, right? We get more present. We get clear on what to do next. We might notice how we feel, which is informing us of a decision that we need to make to do or not do something. And then I love that we feel more calm and we know we have the choice, because that's the thing. I think a lot of times when we're on autopilot, we might be operating from programs of drama where we are feeling like a victim, or boundary problems where we want a boundary, but it's not there because we haven't shared that that's important to us. And we feel scared to do that, right? So when we're able to pause, and again, a pause is an intentional shift in behavior, it activates your creative mind. Really, it gets us into this visionary space where the fact I have, the statistic I have is 40% of creative ideas come when we're disengaged from an activity. So we think this part of pausing is the taboo, right? Like, oh, I'll look like a slacker if I'm going to pause. Well, no. So that's the old way of thinking. This is historically what the world valued, which was productivity and doing everything. And now that we're 24/7, it's like the paradigm hasn't caught up with reality. And so like we're not getting sustained. Burnout happens when 1 out of 3 professionals, according to Deloitte, this summer's study of 2022. So like we're in trouble. And that is why pausing now matters, because our big old icebergs are going to be not just melt away because of climate change. No, like just joking aside, although that's true. We are not going to be able to conform and do what we need to do in the world because we're not looking at what's underneath the surface for us, because we're not pausing. And to me, I feel like pausing is the gateway. I call it like literally the pause portal to move into a space that's more self-aware. And it just starts with a pause. It could be the breath that you just took, or listening to this podcast episode, right? Like there's so many different things there. And when I talk about this pause paradox, to me, what's interesting is that it's like the total opposite of what we think we should do. We think we need to go press on because we're awesome achievers at stuff, right? Like me living in the world of Google, I burned out because I just kept pressing on. I just didn't really regard anything underneath my iceberg. I literally was just like, I got to finish my emails. I got to get this response out and back of ASAP. This project needs to be done before Wednesday morning. And it's like Tuesday night and I don't know what else to do but work now. And then I'm just more stressed. It's like the never ending loop. And that's what I call this pause paradox, right? It's just the basic opposite of really what needs to happen. So I guess my point here, everybody, is as a corporate leader, it is your job. It is your imperative to know that you have the choice to pause, and it doesn't need to take a lot of time. It doesn't need to take money or resources, or it can be any activity. It's about what works for you, really. I have a great resource for this called the Daily Pause Checklist. Like it's literally a 1-pager with a bunch of different things you could try. And now we talk so much about meditation and mindfulness at work, and there's studies now that it's coming out that it's actually healing people, and breath work, which I also do, is healing people, and it's incredible and it's awesome. And those are all pauses, but I don't think we're at a tipping point yet. Like there's still the growth of this, and that's okay. We're going to get there, but you are an agent of change. You are a conduit for that, at least for yourself, right? To start with. So that means knowing that the old way to think about pausing is just outdated, and really throw that out the window, because pausing isn't necessarily just this passive thing. It needs to be intentional, or it doesn't happen, because we're awesome high achievers like we all are. And then we're just in this trap. We're in that cycle, the spin cycle, the hamster wheel, if we're not able to choose differently. And that requires new beliefs. Everything underneath the iceberg needs to change so that that's acceptable. Because I don't know about you, but in my world, like we're all productivity machines, right? Parents work both full time. We did a lot of stuff, and everyone's filling their schedules up. I call it bizifying your life, because that's what the world knew. That's what my family knew. So I ask you, as a corporate leader, as someone who is responsible for not just your life, but the company and your team potentially, as well as leading and influencing others, do you see the benefits for yourself as you rearrange the undercurrents of the iceberg through pausing? Because to me, that's all it is. And you don't have to think about it other than just, what could I do right now to serve my doing? How could I be in service to my doing? And that's what I believe pausing helps us do. I also think there's a lot of myths out there about pausing, a lot of myths, like, like mythbusters, right? Like we got to disprove these things. And the things that I think are top of my mind are that burnout and stress are not inevitable. Okay. Like it's not, especially in technology. It's not required to burn out. You don't have to. Yes, it has to do with conditions in the company, but it's also how you choose to show up. You have ultimate power. You are the person. You can move on and do something different. And maybe that takes time and that takes savings, and you gear up for that and you do it. But it's also a choice, right? So it's not inevitable. And you can learn these skills that are based in emotional intelligence to feel better as you go about your day, and not to transmute your stress into different things. It can be diffused, right? So you also believe in yourself, right? You are not your thoughts. You do not have to believe your thoughts. And when you do that, when you start to reinforce inspired actions, so to speak, and things that are about you, and that your new visions for yourself, new emotions that you're moving towards, it influences you beyond what you see and hear, right? This is your field. That's the quantum level. And your stress levels change, right? So because you will be literally shifting that stress down to the cellular level. And like no one really needs self-judgment either, right? So that's another myth. So judgment keeps us stuck in our story. It's in the past, right? Like, oh, I'm so loud. It doesn't, this is such a depressing story. I really don't need to tell it again. Okay. Do you know how many judgments were just in that story by itself? Probably like 4 or 5 that I heard. So the past keeps us the same. The stories keep us the same. And so to get out of that, to bust through, we need to tell a new story, right? We have to keep our head and body together in this emotional field, and not just live above the waterline, but take into account what's below, right? Yeah. So just take a deep breath into all that. Yeah. And then the last point I want to make is overwhelm or burnout or stress, they're not your fault. Whatever you did to get here is whatever it was. And that's okay, right? We all did the best jobs we could with what we knew. So don't worry about that too much. And again, the story is what's important here. Stop being a critic or blaming yourself or like others, really. That's just drama. And know that you can do something different and take charge. Like you are the CEO of your to-do list, as I like to say. I think that's such a good thing to say. You are the CEO of your to-do list. So just go ahead and say that. I am the CEO of my to-do list. Hello, here I am, right? So I'm curious, what is your excuse when you think about yourself? What is your excuse when it comes to not pausing or not taking a break? Like, what do you tell yourself? Because we all have something. For me, it was like, I don't have time. I just don't have time. And this is for me, the pause person, right? That was my excuse. And that stems from underneath the waterline in my iceberg, that I wasn't good enough, or I'm not enough, right? If I don't have enough time, then I'm not enough, period. And you're going to have your version of that, right? Maybe it's similar, but maybe it's something the same, right? So think about this, because it has crazy big implications. To know that as a corporate leader, you are so, so important to know that you can take a stand and know that you can be in service to your doing. It doesn't need to take a lot of time. It doesn't need to take resources. It can literally be a gratitude moment, right? I last week in my podcast talked about gratitude benefits, and it increases productivity. It improves mood. It increases health and immunity. There's like so many things. Everything it does, it basically improves. So there's a lot of really good things there. And if you want the daily pause checklist, you can get that from me. Either message me on audio here at anchor.fm/the Pausecast, or you can go to my Facebook group, facebook.com/groups/be the pause. And it's in there under files. I would love to have you in our community. Our community is mostly, it's called Pause to Thrive for feminine leaders, for women leaders. And, we welcome everyone there, but it will be mostly women leaders, as I know a lot of times we're working on community and doing things there too. All right, everyone, thanks for tuning in. And I'm excited for you to try some new pauses in service to your doing, to do all this great stuff that you do in the world and at work. Take care.